Okay, we are live with the broadcast from the Virginia Department of Education, specifically looking out to reach out to school counselors in Virginia and administrators that would be working with students in many ways. I'm Paul Nichols, and I'm very pleased to welcome as guests for this conference, although I'm the guest here at the Department of Ed, Dr. Steve Staples, who is our State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We also have, did I say something wrong?
No.
Renee Zando, who is on the SOL Innovation Committee, and we'll be talking about that. She also serves as a Director of Guidance, School Counseling, in Henrico County Public Schools. And of course, we have Mr. Joseph Worf, who is the counselor specialist here at the Department of Education as well. Our topic for today is basically what we're seeing as the need and identifying what does a high school graduate who is career and college ready look like? And it's become quite a pertinent topic nationally. I think specifically in Virginia, though, we have opportunities to look at our SOLs free of some of the things that might be holding back some of the other states. And our governor has certainly embraced the whole idea of new initiatives in community colleges and higher education, as well as in the K-12 environment. And a year or so ago, actually began a program that we know of as the SOL Innovation Committee that's bringing together educators and higher education and businessmen and really taking a good look at accountability and assessment and what it looks like and how we might tweak the system to make it so that students are leaving the high schools as graduates without some of the gaps that we think might be in place. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about some of the opportunities that the State Board of Education is looking at and facing these questions. And then what is the role of the school counselor as we look at some of these potential challenges in education and what resources are available for the school counselors to look at. So why don't we get started by actually discussing what is this SOL Innovation Committee and about who's serving on it and what's going on with that. And Dr. Staples, you and Ms. Zando are the two that are on the committee, so if you give us an idea of that, we'd like that.
Paul, thank you. And first, thanks for doing it, and thanks for all the counselors and folks who are taking time from a busy day to join us. I recognize that you've got 150 things you could be doing, and we appreciate you giving us a little bit of time. I'm an ex officio on the Innovations Committee, actually, and the intent was to bring together a group of stakeholders to examine our current system of standards assessments, of accountability for schools, of accreditation, and to come to a consensus on recommendations to create the next wave, the next level. We say to folks often that our accountability system has served us well in many ways, and it's done some positive, productive things. The question was, so what do we want it to do next? And how do we have to change it in order to make those things happen?
Right.
And so Ms. Zando was on the committee to, I think, represent both a stakeholder group of school counselors and because of expertise in education. So I don't know what you'd add there.
So I just wanted to say that the state leaders on the Education Committee, Dr. Staples and the Secretary of Education, have been very great at telling us to really think outside the box, think as if money was not an obstacle, as if, resources were an obstacle. What is ideal for the Virginia SOLs, including assessments? I think a lot of people think we are doing nothing but assessment, and we do want to make it clear that we are doing more than just assessment. We're talking about accountability. Standards of learning are much more than just a test. So we are told to really think outside the box. We have two subcommittees that were formed from the SOL Innovation Committee in the last year. One was the Accountability 2.0, and I serve on the Assessment 2.0 subcommittee. And as a school counselor, we feel that it's important to have us on the committee because I come from not just the educational background. I was a teacher and now am a school counselor, but also really advocating for the students and thinking of students not just as a whole group of people, but as individuals as well.
I think it's safe to say that the Innovations Committee has certainly confirmed for us that the system we have, as good as it may be, has flaws and it has gaps. And so the intent of the committee, and you put it well when you said you're advocating for students, there are times where the system didn't serve schools or students well. And so we're talking about how we correct those.
So in addition to looking at SOLs as tests, and we have this question before us about students leaving high school being career and college ready, how is that question coming up in the committee itself, and what things are being addressed in the committee?
I can answer a little bit of that. One of the things that comes up a lot is talking about what do we want a high school graduate to look like. So we talk about this portrait of a graduate, and some school divisions around the state already have what's considered a portrait of a graduate. But we talk about on the subcommittees and as a full committee, what are the things that we think a high school graduate should have when they graduate high school. And it's not things like passing a test on Algebra 1, but it's more things like civic responsibility, problem-solving skills, critical thinking skills, financial literacy, being able to read for different purposes, not just reading a literature passage and being able to answer questions. So that's one of the big things, and a lot of those things I think are college and career readiness things that we want our high school graduates, and we're all very much on the same page with that.
Interestingly, when we were speaking with some college presidents, and we posed that question to them, so what was ready, right? And there, I think there is a definition of college ready. In fact, one of them said, "What college?" Mm-hmm. The point being that college ready varies both with your program of study and with the particular institution that you choose. Right. If your college ready is MIT, right, well, that looks like one college ready piece. If it's a trade school, then it might look very different. Not that one is better than the other, but the preparation programs are different. But interestingly, after we kind of got through that, they spent most of their time talking about skill sets that were non-academic. And I believe it might have been the JMU president said, all of our students come to us academically prepared. We've selected, we have a huge number of applicants, and we select the cream of the crop. So when they come to us, they are all academically prepared, but many fail. And they fail because college ready is more than academic preparation. It's problem solving, it's independent living. Right. It's the ability to understand how to manage and budget your own time. Mm-hmm. All of those are factors. They kept coming back to the notion of perseverance, right, of grit. What do you do the first time you're not successful at something? For many college-bound students, they've been traditionally highly successful. Then they get to a different environment, all of a sudden for the first time, a C-. How they respond to that is a pretty clear indicator as to how college ready they are. So it was an interesting conversation.
And one of the things that you mentioned, which I was glad to hear, as you talked about the institutions of higher education that students might select to go on for further education, you didn't just say the four-year universities. You mentioned the technologies, opportunities in the community colleges and others. And I hear that becoming much more inclusive in the terminology of college ready. It's not just 4-year, but many others. In fact, with my program, Virginia Advanced Study Strategies, and some research that we've been doing through grants with the U.S. Department of Education, we've had a lot of opportunity to work with the State Chamber of Commerce, with Blueprint Virginia, and with the Virginia Manufacturers Association and other entities that are basically, and reflecting what even the governor is saying, there are so many jobs out there in Virginia that they're not finding persons to fill, because it seems that the mindset that has been traditional in the high schools has been, let's prepare them for college, primarily meaning a 4-year institution, when there is a demand for more education beyond high school, but some are even suggesting as many as 70% of those jobs aren't requiring a 4-year degree, right, but further training. Is that one of the ideas that's coming up in the Innovation Committee? And how does the board then pick in looking at what schools might do?
I don't want to jump on you
You
there.
can go.
I think that the board is actually already having that conversation. The state board, as well as staff here, are beginning to embrace the idea that really what we're talking about is career ready for everybody.
Okay.
And that college may be a vehicle to get you to be career ready.
Right.
And we joke about it, I think, around the innovations committee. Several folks have said, well, even if they go to college, I'm hoping that they'll have a career at the end of college. What we're finding is often that's not the case. That students who come out with a 4-year degree don't really have a marketable skill set. That the 4-year degree in and of itself doesn't automatically mean success in the career field anymore.
Right.
So folks have to look at what's your major, what's your field of study, those kinds of things. So the notion of college and or career ready is really more about being career ready and determining what's the right pathway to get you there. Several of the jobs we're looking at, high-paying jobs, $50,000 and more per year, are going to require high school plus some credentials. So there will be 19-year-olds entering the workforce with the right credential set, able to generate a long-term and productive career, where some 4-year college graduates in the wrong field of study may find it difficult to go out and find a job. So we want everybody to think about that career readiness, whether it takes you a credential after high school or 4 years of undergraduate study.
Again, I'm thinking back on some of the research that we've done with our program. There's a lot of data that seems to reinforce that the cost of higher education has tended to go up significantly, maybe faster than the typical increase in cost of other types of things, and that it really becomes important for parents and students to look on the return on their investment for those costs of further education. Again, pointing back to what you mentioned related to some of the career literacy, career exploration, and how those are expected of students as they would move through. And I know, Joseph, I don't want to exclude you on this, so maybe you could point to this. Are there some things probably school counselors are aware of it, maybe some others who are not necessarily school counseling and looking at graduation requirements, but there are some things that are there things that have already been put in place for some of our expectations for high school graduation that might help students, or at least point students and counselors and others in that direction?
Well, I think, the whole college and career readiness that's been around for a while, the whole mantra, I think what it has done for K-12 education in particular, it has made there's been a paradigm shift in our thinking to the diploma being the end. Like, what is our K-12, what are our responsibilities in K-12? The diploma. Well, the paradigm shift is that the diploma now is really just the beginning. Okay, and so it all comes down to planning, and with school counselors, we know with we've got standards and regulations that comprehensive development of school counseling and career and academic and personal social, that is a piece of this collaboration that needs to be seamless and developmental all the way through. Some of the things that have been put into place, certainly the academic and career plan is one, where we're having students now in 7th and 8th grade sit down and make a meaningful plan for their future. And I think that was such a stroke of genius for Virginia to be able to do that. And nationally, when I looked at some of the research, it showed most of other states are doing that in 9th or 10th grade. And I thought, as well as the research, that starts a little late. And so getting students to really engage and empower students to make critical decisions early. And one of the questions I always get is, how are students going to know what they want to do in 7th and 8th grade? Well, they may not, but it's better to have a plan and start that plan and change it through making informed decisions than it is to not have a plan at all, which many of us didn't have when we were in high school. And so being able to put academic and career planning in place, being able to look at school counselors, being able to look at what's going on in our communities around them, around their school buildings, looking at the labor market statistics and data, knowing what kind of jobs are out there for students, whether it requires them to have a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree or whatever the case may be, to help them to make these informed decisions. And if I may really quickly, recently the College Board came and gave us some statistics on those students taking those SATs exams. One of the sections in there, and this is kind of a testimony to the work that's being done state, all the way from the highest workforce development all the way down to school counselors and teachers. But Some of the data they gave us talked about intended college majors. And so the students that are taking the SAT examinations put down the major that they plan to go into school to study. If we look at the kind of information that's been put out in the last 8 to 10 years on STEM, and knowing what kind of positions are going to be available in the next 5 to 10 years in health sciences, our baby boomers are getting ready to retire, and so there's the health sciences clusters are going to be huge. I wanted to read you the top 4 college majors that are being placed in here by students taking the SAT. Number 1, health professions and related clinical services. 2, the second highest, business management, marketing, and related support services. I know, and many of us know, that the business area, that cluster is the big, that has the most jobs. And so that's always pretty much going to be up there. Number 3, engineering. And number 4, biological and biomedical sciences. I think that speaks highly of the kind of work that's going on right now, not only all the way from the workforce development to the SHIP, to community colleges, to the K-12 arena. We have students that have heard kind of what we've been speaking about the labor out there. So I just wanted to mention that, but the kind of work that we're doing in schools right now with these comprehensive developmental school counseling programs to assist these students in making informed decisions. And I think that's the difference between now and maybe 10 or 12, 15 years ago, is that students are starting to think about it earlier and knowing. And when you talk to the businesses out there, they want those technical skills, but they want the students who have the team building, that be able to work in a team, problem solving and conflict resolution and those kind of things. And so we're able to teach that through some of these courses as well, through some of our CTE courses.
So I hear you suggesting, if I might rephrase it, that the whole idea of career literacy, whereas we might have just looked at academics before, some of the economic issues that the Virginia has been facing and the information coming from the state chambers, Blueprint Virginia and others, are beginning to trickle into the schools and counselors and others through some of the expectations for the high school diploma. We're beginning to see an impact. And at least in Virginia, we're seeing middle school and high school career literacy indications going on, and maybe even in elementary school, there's some options for some of the counselors to be doing some career literacy.
Certainly, and it starts in elementary school. We've got great resources around those areas for elementary.
What are some of those resources?
The Virginia View is supported by the Virginia Department of Education in particular, as Virginia View, as well as Virginia Education Wizards. So the Virginia View is a great K-8 system. We can go in and actually get information. A lot of activities on there you can just download for classroom guidance activities. If you haven't been on there, it's vaview.org. You can go in and kind of gives you information, really kind of introduces you to career areas, career clusters in the areas, as well as you're able to take an interest inventory really, early on, to at least figure out, kind of get your senses around your students to start thinking about goals, about interests before they move into middle school and have to sit down and create an academic and career plan. They should know what a career is first.
Sure.
So.
And that's really important, Joe. What we're finding as we push the topic is that for so many of our students, their career field is limited by the careers that their parents are aware of.
Right.
So I'm going to choose a career field based on what my parents either do or they know someone who does it. And we're seeing so many new emerging career fields that parents aren't going to be aware of.
Right.
So somewhere, and this has certainly come up on the Innovations Committee, we have to talk about how schools will get the support and get the credit when they spend time, and time is a very limited resource,
right,
when they spend time opening up those options and letting students begin to become aware of other career fields before they even begin to hone in on, well, what might I be interested in? I think Virginia View can help with that in a sense.
Sure.
And the Wizard, and of course I know there are other programs that are being developed. The Manufacturers Association has put together something called Dream It, Do It Virginia that is also available online. It does focus a little bit more on the non-medical areas because they're not necessarily as supportive by the nature of who's supporting them of some of the medical, but they've got some great videos. And I know there's also a wonderful budgeting training program inside of that can help students get a real good sense of how much it costs to make a living? What does making a living that's appropriate for your goals in life look like, and what jobs support that type of thing? So there are many resources that are out there for persons to be able to work with.
Well, and that bleeds over. I know you want to go to a topic,
Yes.
but that bleeds over into our whole accountability discussion. Because right now our system is built primarily on accountability only in one of the arenas. It's an academic accountability.
Right.
So it really boils down to whether or not the right percentage of students are passing an SOL test.
Right.
The conversations around the Innovations Committee are about broadening that perspective. This is not to say that the academic component isn't important. It obviously is. If students don't have the basic academic skills, they're not going to be successful in any career. But the system is so focused only on those
Right.
that it doesn't allow us to begin to factor in other things. Last year, students earned, Joe will correct me with the number, over 103,000 career credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all the newspapers carried the story of the schools with the highest SOL pass rates.
Right.
But I didn't see many stories on the schools that were able to get students the most credentials in a career tech field.
Right.
That's because our accountability system focuses primarily only on the academic component.
Right.
Again, important, but not in the sense that it's the only thing. So I think the Innovations Committee is talking about how could we broaden that so that we could allow schools to account for and be credited for some of those other things that they're doing, which are very important.
So now I do want to look into that a little bit more. Are you suggesting that perhaps something that we hold so dear in our schools, like annual yearly progress, could be measured by students' progress through a career development and credentialing development program, as well as something academic?
Certainly, I'm not going to predict the action of any board, but
Right.
yes, that's what folks are talking about, is that tracking only academic progress and proficiency of students limits their ability to actually be ready for careers, because career preparation is broader than that. We need to know more than that. College presidents have told us that. Employers have told, what everyone is telling us is there's more to getting students ready for that real world experience than simply the academic piece. So yes, I think what we'll see ultimately is some kind of a system that tracks academic growth, workforce preparation, career exploration. I mean, there civic participation, those whole notion. I think there's even a discussion about social emotional well-being of students,
Okay.
and how we would track those kinds of things.
So Joe, you've worked in a number of areas related to counseling, the academic, the career and technical. For the benefit of those who may not be as familiar, what does the development of a credentialing system and earning a credential look like in the school?
Well, we have a credentialing list. Actually, our board approves a list of industry certifications, credentials that we currently have and exist. Credentials, if as a whole, I mean, a diploma is a credential if you think about it. But I mean, credentials in general are based on certain competencies that are earned in learning. As Dr. Staples mentioned a little before, a certain specific part of a curriculum, and you get something for that to show that you actually have those competencies, and you learn those. We've got industry certifications, everything from the Microsoft Office Suite kind of examinations, all the way to NOCTI as a national organization, and we also have basic accounting and accounting, everything that you can possibly imagine almost through the CTE field. We have that the board has approved, and as you probably already know, and everybody there watching today, is that standard diploma now requires that you earn one of those credentials, one of those certifications. And so we see those credentials rising very rapidly, and we know that that's going to assist students in moving towards that. But we start looking at certain competency-based kind of learning that's going on currently in the schools in a lot of ways. But you think about digital badging as well. That's one thing that we're kind of interested in. I am being able to show that literacy, certain competencies earned through a digital badging. So you can show that I've learned this through that kind of thing. And so,
and if I might jump in, because I've also done some research on that. Typically, when you're looking at credentialing, it's often thought of as being something more at the post-secondary level, somewhat in the secondary level with your career and technical programs. When you look further at digital badges, those are opportunities for students to engage in a variety of programs, robotics, seminars, summer activities that are often in the informal education arena, but could be gathered and students can be identified as having earned certain components of, or mastered certain components, and then brought in and continue to build early on, even as early as middle school is what you were speaking of, with the not only the career development, but real exploration that way for students to work in that arena. So the badging can lead to the credentials. Is it set up so that what a student could do in high school toward credentialing would move right on into the community college, or are they separate at this point?
Well, you mean digital badging? Or
I'm talking about the credentials.
Yeah, well, many of workforce and community college will look at specific industry certifications as assisting in those students in coming into certain programs, for sure. And you know, you think of EMT and some other areas of students that would go into a community college and participate in that specific program. You can get those in high school now. I think technology is really starting to be able to mesh students, whereas you wouldn't be able to get those certifications perhaps 5 or 10 years ago. Now students are earning these while they're in high school, being able to get that information through online learning and through being able to, just through dual enrollment, being able to go to these community colleges and learn off the clock, so to speak, from public school.
And we're in a better position to actually have that seamlessly transfer from high school to college to university to wherever else it might need to go.
I believe that's the direction we're heading. I know that there's still work to do, certainly, and I think
there are still issues in that, but Paul, that's exactly where we're trying to go. I think all of us in Virginia would like to see improved communication from the K-12 arena to the higher ed arena.
Right.
And make sure that the experience for a student is somewhat seamless.
Okay.
Right now, I know that our community colleges and our K-12 systems, we've signed a memorandum of understanding regarding dual enrollment.
Right.
That speaks to a statewide system of dual enrollment. Because what we don't want is our student to be able to carry that credit or receive some kind of acknowledgement of it in one setting. Oh, but if I go, 30 miles down the road, it's a different setting. For our four-year institutions, it's a little harder because they're a bit more independent, and many of those decisions are simply based at the Board of Visitors level.
Right.
And so we're working to continue to craft those because, again, we'd like it to be seamless. If we have 20 students sitting in a dual enrollment class and all of them would get credit at community college, but only 10 of them would be able to carry that credit to a four-year university,
right,
then we're not quite there. And so right now, that's more of a sticking point for us, is trying to work individually, really, with each of those four-year institutions to get that agreement.
And to some degree individually with the students and their plans and what they're looking at. So if we might go back to an earlier question, because we talked about the Innovation Committee and its impact. Dr. Staples and Ms. Zando, how are we seeing some of the work from the Innovation Committee actually now begin to filter into what the state board is looking at, and some potential things that might be coming to schools as far as maybe some changes from the boards looking at the work that's being done?
From what my knowledge is, I know last year with the first year of the SOL Innovation Committee, we started in July, and by like November, we had to have some recommendations because the General Assembly was coming up. So we did more of a focus on things such as trying to figure out a way, to measure growth and allowing expedited retakes in the middle and elementary schools, which I know definitely improved the SOL rates. Because one of the things we also have to think about at some point is also the federal requirements as well. So we had another SOL innovation about just looking at the school report card, and I think going from one system to another. But it does seem in the last meetings when we've had updates from the Board of Education, and we are starting to look at our accountability system, and we're starting to come up with what our accountability 2.0 coming to the full committee and what we're thinking the different types of ways to be accountable, it sounds like those are really meshing with what the board is talking about as well, which you can probably talk a little bit more about.
Oh, Renee, you're exactly right. I think it was a good description. The initial work of the Innovations Committee looked at some short-term objectives. How could we make the assessment system as configured fairer? How could we make the accreditation system as configured fairer? And so the early recommendations were about tweaking what we had. So you got expedited retakes for all students. We got several more accreditation labels that the board is scheduled to consider for final approval in October. They were concerned about the fact that we didn't really recognize schools that were progressing towards the standard. So if you were at an SOL pass rate and you were at 45%, and then the next year you went to 52%, then the next year you went to 59%, even though you were clearly showing a positive trend, each year you were told you failed, you failed, you failed. And based on some conversations from the Innovations Committee and the state board's work, they're going to recognize progress. They're saying, that seems a fairer system because it comes closer to actually identifying the schools that are doing well.
Right.
Certainly no one is satisfied until all students reach the standard. But what we want to work to do is make sure that we don't mislabel schools who are moving in the right direction in a way that gives people the wrong ideas. So you're going to see progressing towards the standard as a new accreditation label that will likely be approved in October. The board's got that on their agenda. They've already talked about it. The other one is what they call near the benchmark. Right now, we have some pretty hard and fast benchmarks. It's 70% in some content areas, 75% in other. Those are your pass rates. So if you're 75 this year, 76 the next year, and then 74, well, all of a sudden you fail. Mm-hmm. Those minor fluctuations, the board was concerned, again, mislabeled schools. So you're going to see something called near the benchmark, where they would allow schools to get credit for being near the benchmark as long as the other areas were hitting the benchmark. The intent is not to mislabel schools as underperforming or failing, when in fact there's just been a little glitch. I think all of those little tweaks that we've described are where the Innovations Committee went quickly. Now you're taking on the hard work of saying, let's not tweak the current system. Let's talk about how we absolutely revise the current system. And the topics are getting much broader now about how might we assess and factor in individual student growth. Not a statewide, but here's where I was at the beginning of the year, here's where I am at the end of the year. How might we factor in teacher-made assessments? Right now, all the assessments are state-directed, but we're trying to push better local, authentic performance assessments. How might those be uploaded into the system? How might we look at other data, environmental data, school-wide data, attendance, disciplinary data, surveys of students and teachers? How might that all factor into kind of the way that we look at schools? So I think this is really the hard work. The first work was just tweaking it. They're now into the hard work about saying, how do we revise it in a way that's pretty substantive?
When you mentioned just now the idea of looking at individual student performance and growth, I heard in an earlier conversation somewhere, it mentioned that we might be actually giving students the opportunity to sort of assess, to show current levels of competency and going ahead and giving them credit for it so that they could move on. What might that look like in our schools?
There are a couple of ways, Paul, that I think that's playing out. One is already moving through the system. We're creating opportunities to use something other than the 140 clock hour standard to give high school credit. 140 clock hour standard, as you all know, has been here for 100 years. And it was a good measure because at the time there was no measure, and that created a standard understanding of what credit would be. But we've moved past that. And the notion now that every student needs the exact same amount of time to demonstrate proficiency is probably an outdated standard. So the board is working through 3 different avenues where schools could allow students to receive credit and be deemed proficient without waiting for 140 clock hours. Okay. So what that would mean was through a variety of these measures, and the board's working through exactly what those avenues would be. a student could complete their coursework in a particular area, and that frees up time for them to explore some of these other credentialing ideas, for them to do some career exploration. Because right now, our biggest enemy is time. Everybody's got 5.5 hours a day and 180 days a year, and as a result, there's just not time to do the things that we'd like to do.
So I'm hearing two areas where perhaps the board is considering some tweaks, maybe more than tweaks. One is the whole idea of creating more opportunities for students to engage broader than just academics, to show that they're prepared. I know that earlier, even though we're not able to show this graphic here, there was a graphic that you had showed me that was representative of 4 circles that would intersect. At the top of the 4 circles, the top circle representing academic growth, as you were looking at the picture to the left, there's a big circle for career literacy, which we've mentioned a bit. Directly across from career literacy is a circle for the workforce skills, workforce development, the credentials, things of that nature. And at the bottom, the community interaction. So I hear you saying that the board is looking at ways to try to engage students in each of those 4 areas to demonstrate growth and preparation for some specific direction that they would take, as opposed to just a regular diploma. And then I also hear you saying that we're looking at ways of maybe removing some barriers to students that would keep them from moving at their own pace, and giving them the chance of earning these and demonstrating mastery or getting some type of certification, accreditation for what they do, and keeping that and moving forward.
Yeah, no, those are both correct. I think if we could look, if this were a train track and we were looking down the tracks, I don't know if we'll get to the end of the track in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. But the end of the track is truly individualized, self-paced instruction for students that gives them the preparation they need for their career pathway.
Okay.
So I want to be an engineer and I want to go to MIT. Okay. There's going to be a set of credentials that I want to earn along the way. There will be a set of academic proficiencies I've got to demonstrate. I'm going to need some workforce skills to say, well, what is it that engineers do? Do they collaborate? Do they problem solve? How can I demonstrate proficiency? At the end of that track, again, how long it takes, I don't know. We're likely to be looking at the educational arena where, instead of talking about educating all students for the same amount of time in the same subjects, it's a much more individually paced thing. Think of it more like the medical field.
Right.
We don't all go sit in the doctor's office and 20 of us get served at the same time. What we get is each of us is seen individually. Our health assessment is given, and we're determined, okay, here's what we need in order to progress there. I think that's a more likely paradigm for where education is going. Not tomorrow,
Right.
not the next week, so I don't want to panic.
We're moving in
But
that
those
direction.
tracks are going in that direction,
Okay.
absolutely.
Now, I've had the opportunity in my career, 40 years now, of being a teacher, a counselor, an administrator in the traditional school system. And I'm hearing this from the administrator's perspective, and I'm going,
Oh my
this
God.
sounds like a whole different ballgame.
It is. It is.
Then I've had many administrators say to me, I would love to have our students in a position to take more career and technical programs in addition to working toward their academic subjects, but there's not time. You're saying we're looking at some innovative ideas that would come from the schools and other places to create some of these opportunities. And then I'm also looking, and more specifically for this program that really sort of is reaching out to school counselors, I'm putting on my former school counselor hat, and I was a school counselor, always a school counselor, I've always said. Who's going to work with students on doing this? Renee, what do you think? What is the response that a school counselor would look at this, and what is some of the concerns that they'll have, and what do we have to work with them?
So in order, I mean, I love the idea of what he's talking about, but in order to make it happen, and he knows this too, because we've talked about it, is number one, we definitely, I mean, we need more professional development for school counseling in making sure the way that we are delivering our careers is not, I mean, 10 years ago is when I graduated from my program, looking at the occupational handbook, which is now completely not how we do career counseling. So a lot of professional development for those that have been in the field a lot longer. But I think too, we definitely need more of us. I mean, there's no way that we're going to be able to do this with caseloads of 300, 350, 400, 450, even up to 500. They're going to have to lower our caseloads. I know the the American School Counselor Association says the recommended caseload is 1 to 250, and Dr. Staples told me the other day that even seems too high, which I loved hearing. And I think that we're going to have to really change what school counselors are doing in the school, because we are spending so much time doing things that we are not necessarily trained for with our non-counseling duties and doing so. I mean, it seems like if they don't know who to do it, school counselors are the ones doing it. And if they are going to expect this of us, which this is what we are trained to do, is work with students individually on these things, then we are going to have to be able to really have the time, the resources, and the lower caseloads in order to make a true comprehensive school counseling program in all of our schools, where we can deliver this through classroom guidance lessons, through small group counseling, and especially through individual plans with each student to make sure we're reaching all of their needs, and starting young, even in elementary school. So
sure. And Renee, let me reinforce, you're exactly right, but I don't want anybody to panic. Again, we don't picture this happening immediately. What we're trying to lay out is a vision for the future, and then a path to get us from where we are to getting to that future. We're on the path now. We have 5 high schools that sought and accepted innovation grants.
Okay.
And we asked those high schools, how would you reinvent yourself to meet the needs of this century? How would you reorganize? And most of them are organizing around the notion of some individualized paced instruction. So we're starting with small pilots.
Right.
Some of them aren't even doing whole schools. They're doing small cohorts within the school. That experience will inform us as to what that would look like school-wide, and then what that would look like statewide. And so we'll be rolling that out over a series of years. But I think initially we need to start looking at how would it look if we didn't do high school the way we're doing it. We hope that next year we can offer a similar idea for middle schools.
Right.
To say, how would you restructure if you didn't have to do it the way you're doing it? And we certainly want to know those regulations that are inhibiting you from accomplishing those things that we're talking about is important. What prevents you from doing career counseling? What prevents you from helping students gain workforce skills, from envisioning their next career?
Had the privilege of working all the years of the Governor's Best Practice Centers when the SOLs were first put into place. And one of our mantras, which I hear being repeated almost here, is that we have to begin with the end in mind. And we're basically saying then the end is not a high school diploma. The end is really looking beyond at the career that's going to be appropriate for the student, and then what it takes, and move backwards with some of this as even a part of the career literacy that we would be doing. Renee, what do you think is the state of career literacy, and Joseph, you as well, in schools with counselors? Are counselors quick to embrace the idea of career development as one of their duties, or is it something that they're really well trained for, do you think? Or, I mean, this is just an idea or an observation. People would have different ideas about that. But if so, then good. If not, what options are there?
So I can speak a lot from the high school level, and just from the high school level, I think we want to spend more time on career literacy. We absolutely want to. But with all of those issues that I was just talking about, needing more school counselors, needing smaller caseloads, and less non-counseling duties, it makes it more difficult for us. I think we all have great ideas in our head. I know my department, even before we even talked about doing this webinar, we were talking about our department and how we are really good at counseling a 4-year student going to a 4-year college. We are really good at that. But what we are not very good at doing necessarily, it's not that we don't know how, but we're not as educated and not as good at delivering it for the trade schools, not necessarily even knowing every trade school that's out there, not necessarily doing a lot, as much as we could, we feel, for community college or those going straight into the workforce. And we were brainstorming as a department, what can we do this school year where we can really help focus students on that? And when do we need to do that in the year? Even though elementary schools and middle schools are doing all of this education for the student when they're there, it doesn't seem like until second semester of the senior year that they get through the notion that they're not going to a 4-year college.
Right.
No matter if their GPA is a 1.0 or a, whatever their GPA is, they have been somehow embedded in their heads that 4-year college is the way to go. So it's in educating them way sooner that these are other really awesome opportunities for students not going to a 4-year college. And you have such great opportunities. I went to a 4-year college and have a master's degree, in some of these credentialing programs and trade schools make way more money than I do. But it's things like that is the education, and when in the year do we do that? But I do think we need more professional development. I think we have great relationships with 4-year colleges, with this admissions counselors. We have great organizations around the state, like PACAC, who do a lot of training for us. So we do need to really do a better job with trade schools and things like that. And I think that they might be a little more individualized when the 4-year colleges come together a little bit more and have a lot of opportunities to come together, when trade schools don't necessarily, to my knowledge, have like a state organization or anything like that. Or if they do, let us know. Because I think it's just providing that education early and being better at more than just counseling kids on 4-year college.
We have some questions that are coming up, but before we get to those, I don't want you to stop sending them, but I do want, you mentioned some of the trade schools. I know apprenticeship is something that's being very much looked at as well. Joseph, what might be opportunities to learn more about apprenticeships and how students might have available?
Well, there's information out there. Typically, you would go to a school counselor, a career and technical education teacher or administrator. But back to Renee, what's her comments? I think it starts in our counselor education programs, in our master's programs, because I actually had the opportunity to teach one just recently, but I was also in one, obviously. And that information out there about labor market data and things like that it's not at the forefront really of what they're trying to teach. And so counselors coming out of those programs need to have that information to begin with. Professional development certainly is another piece. And I do, it'll give me a plug here I do an academic career plan series, a video streaming series each year. And so this year on October 15th, I'll be doing part 1, which is elementary, middle, and secondary kind of academic and career plan assisting students. And then on November 12th, it's a secondary to post-secondary transition. So I do that annually, and they're archived. And so that's just one piece. We need to get out even more than that, try to get the information. But I think school counselors at the school level, in your day-to-day craziness, and I was there, you have great intentions to do career development and career literacy for students, but things happen. Yeah. And that first thing that gets pushed to the side is not going to be scheduling or academics or the personal social even. It's going to be the career, because that's the easiest thing to try to replace, to try to do later on. And sometimes it just doesn't get done. And so to your question, there's a lot of information out there in the career and technical education areas. And, we've touched on career and technical education today a lot. And I see just CTE and what academics kind of melding quite nicely. The CTE concentrators. So we've got students that have a CTE concentration. Half of those have the advanced studies diploma. They're earning advanced studies diploma. So you're seeing the kind of programs that are available for students, and getting them that information early on, again, to help them to be able to see what's available in the school or in the division, to be able to step out in those areas. We'll allow them to do apprenticeships. We'll allow them to do any of those work-based kind of learning opportunities, job shadowing, or mentorship.
And that's actually one of the vehicles that the state board is considering to allow students to earn credit instead of 140 clock hours.
Okay.
So you might be able to get credit for community-based experience where you spend, 8 hours a week working in a hospital setting because you're interested in a career in the medical field. So that kind of exposure certainly has a value in your learning and demonstrates some proficiencies and some understandings that you wouldn't have otherwise. So apprenticeships and internships are part of their agenda.
Right. And we're going to go to the questions, but as you mentioned plugs, I need to make one as well. Of course, as a resource, the Virginia Career Development Association, on which I'm a board member for professional development, is out there. We love having the school counselors as well as other professionals participate in the professional development activities and things that we have going on. I also know, and Joseph is aware as well, that there is now from the National Career Development Association a career development facilitator training program that's available, and I'm one of the instructors for that and others as well, and schools might want to learn more about that type of thing. We have some 2-day training programs available through Virginia Advanced Study Strategies and others. So there are some options for schools to use for some professional development activities that are out there, and people can get in touch with us if they're looking for more information. One of the questions that I see come up is that these are great points. How has the thought come to the forefront that we need more school counselors? Obviously, you mentioned that, but as Dr. Stables, what would be the process of maybe getting that? Could be very timely because we know the legislature is getting ready to kick back in, and there's probably looking for some legislation that might move in that direction. Or how do we go about that?
I think there are two pieces of it. And I thought Renee spoke eloquently to the fact that counselors really are overwhelmed by other things too often. And as we've cut positions statewide, and we have, we look around the state, over the past 6 years, we've lost 5,000 K-12 positions statewide. 5,000.
Wow.
That work didn't go away.
No.
What it meant was that work got redistributed. So, now, Paul's going to do a little bit of what somebody else was doing, and Joe's going to do a little bit, and Renee's going to do a little bit. And oftentimes it was the school counselor who ended up with a lot more than a little bit. So I think first we'll start with an examination of what is it that school counselors are doing, and what parts of that should they be doing, and what parts should someone else be doing. The second piece is then the standards of quality. And the standards of quality set the staffing standards that the state determines are the minimal expectations for all schools. So in 5th grade, it's 35 students per 1 teacher.
Right.
That's the minimal standard. You shouldn't get bigger than that. State's not paying for it. Well, the counseling standards that you spoke to are part of the SOQ standards. The state board will actually begin to review the standards of quality in October. And they'll start looking at what are the standards that we would like to propose need change. And then those recommendations go to the General Assembly, because ultimately those staffing standards determine state funding. So the General Assembly will be the ultimate decision maker on whether or not they pass. But I think building a persuasive case that we are expecting something different of positions is maybe the beginning of how we talk about how many we need.
So is there a place then for counselors, administrators to get more actively engaged in the process of demonstrating what they do and what they would like to do and how to build a difference?
I think certainly the board, as would we at the Department of Ed, like to hear from counselors regarding duties that they see that they have and how they impact their ability to deliver on the mission we've discussed today. And then certainly the entire board process is an open public process. So any counselors associations, any individual counselors are certainly free to comment on, attend, and share information with the board as well as they start looking through the standards of quality.
And what about our counselor educator programs, and how might they be engaged more in the conversation?
We work with all preparation programs through a variety of advisory boards, and anytime the state board is considering significant changes in the expectations of staff, be it a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, school counselor, we then communicate that through those avenues to the preparation programs to say, here are some things that we're now expecting graduates to have proficiency in, to demonstrate skill sets in. Talk to us about how you're changing your program to do that. Frankly, we haven't focused on the master's level school counseling programs.
Okay.
Most of our focus has been on teacher preparation programs.
And the administrator preparation
Exactly.
programs as well.
Exactly. But I think these conversations now are certainly informing us that that's the next step. Is to begin to engage them to say, the way you're preparing counselors may not meet the needs of real counselors' work in the next
And
5 to
that
10 years.
is happening also at the national level. I know last year I went to San Diego for the White House convening on the Reach Higher initiative. And a big piece of that group is the counselor educators being a piece of that. And some of the complications they're having is with their national credentialing system too, the K-CRAP of how they have to prepare people and whether those can be updated to make sure that they are educating counselors the way that we need them educated. So that group I know is happening, or there is conversations also happening at the national level, and Virginia is sending a team of counselor educators, supervisors of school districts and various other people, some Virginia Department of Education folks, they're going to send some people to the White House convening this year to even start making that work go, hopefully, even more. With part of it is the professional development piece with school counselors, but a big piece of that is the counselor education programs as well.
Okay. Another question we have is the board considering a plan or recommendations to limit non-counseling duties, such as scheduling, test coordination, etc., to school counselors so that they can focus their experience, knowledge, and training on providing social, emotional, and career development as a priority. That sort of goes along with what we've been talking about.
It does, and I think this board is less likely to make that a mandate. I think this board has been very careful in saying that we want to give local flexibility, the greatest autonomy we can. But I think what the board is more likely to do is set expectations for outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And that will drive the work that people do. When academics was the only focus of accountability, then everybody had a role to play in that academic circle.
Right.
And so everyone was involved in that, because that ultimately determined whether a school was deemed successful or not.
Right.
When we broaden that to include other categories, and those are reported and accounted for, well, now they're going to become important. So all of a sudden, the number of career plans that are completed, the number of opportunities students have to explore careers, when that becomes part of accountability, then I think it's likely that you'll see school divisions farming out duties in a way that says, we want to make this a priority. So I don't want to misspeak for the board. I don't think they'll mandate it. This board has been very good about trying not to encumber locals with a lot more rigid rules, but to allow them to respond to the expectations for state level performance in a way that says, how do you meet the expectations? And ultimately, I think that's the same thing's going to happen, because counselors can't be doing assessments and 20 other things if career development becomes a significant outcome.
And one of the things that we are going to need to be advocating for is those local school boards as well, and how they are, it's a lot of education, because what guidance counselors, you mentioned that word earlier, did 20, 30, 40 years ago is not what school counselors are trained to have a master's degree and a license to do today.
Right.
And I think too, one of the things that we are pushing with my organization, the Virginia School Counselor Association, is we are going to start advocating for a statewide school counseling evaluation. So that will hopefully, if we can get that done, it will be educating those administrators, school boards, superintendents across the state what we actually should be doing, as opposed to what they're used to us doing. So.
Excellent.
We're running out of time. I want to, on behalf of the Virginia Career Development Association, Virginia Counselors Association, the VSCA, the VASC, there's many of our organizations that are here, thank all of you for participating in this. And it looks like we've had 170 some participants in this. The program is also being recorded for YouTube so that it can be viewed later. And we just appreciate this first opportunity and would ask that you keep an open mind for more webinars of a variety of types coming from the different groups and the Department of Ed, perhaps, to see how these things continue to develop. But again, thank you, and thank you all for participating, and we'll hopefully hear from you and see you soon.